Senhoras e senhores, boa noite. Em cumprimento à programação da primeira Conferência Anual de Alto Nível da Parceria para Governo Aberto, OGP, neste momento, inicia-se a cerimônia de encerramento das atividades técnicas do primeiro dia do evento. São convidados para que se dirija à mesa de honra as seguintes autoridades: o excelentíssimo senhor Jorge Age Sobrinho, ministro de Estado-chefe da Controladoria Geral da União do Brasil. Acompanhado da senhora Samantha Power, diretora sênior e assistente do presidente dos Estados Unidos, Barack Obama. Nós convidamos as ilustres autoridades a ocuparem seus lugares, por favor. Senhoras e senhores, com a palavra, neste momento, o excelentíssimo senhor ministro Jorge Age Sobrinho.
Estamos com o sistema de tradução simultânea?
Sim, ministro.
Sim? Boa noite a todos. É com satisfação que nós nos encontramos aqui ao final de um dia muito intenso de trabalho, certamente de trabalho altamente produtivo. Sei que por isso mesmo todos estão suficientemente cansados e devemos manter esta sessão nos limites de tempo apenas necessários, sem maiores delongas. Nesta sessão de encerramento dos trabalhos deste primeiro dia, eu quero aqui apenas introduzir, apresentar a minha parceira de OGP desde o primeiro momento, a doutora Samantha Powers. A doutora Samantha, como assessora da Casa Branca, do presidente Barack Obama, foi a pessoa de quem recebi o primeiro contato, o primeiro telefonema de convite para o Brasil engajar-se desde o início na iniciativa da parceria por governo aberto. Atendendo ao seu convite, autorizado pela presidenta Dilma Rousseff, fui a Washington, onde começamos as discussões, desde os primeiros momentos, do que hoje se transformou nesta iniciativa já claramente vitoriosa da parceria por governo aberto. A doutora Samantha fará todo o restante do que precisa ser dito nesta sessão final do dia de hoje.
Thank you, George. We are the last individuals standing between you and a drink. And it's been a very long day, I know, for many of you. And so we're just going to make just a few remarks, mainly just to send us into this evening and into tomorrow with a little bit of momentum, reflection, some of the questions that are hanging over all of us as we think about next steps and so forth with OGP. George has been present since the creation of this effort and the kind of congealing of the idea of OGP among a number of countries that came together relatively spontaneously in early 2011. Early 2011. It's hard to believe it's been only that long. To think through what this concept would be, and I must say, just walking in here and seeing the posters, which are brilliantly done by Brazil, listing the highlights of each country's national action plan, I'm having host envy and wishing that we, in September, as the co-host with Brazil, but as the geographic host on the margins of the General Assembly, that we had been so clever as to pull out such key commitments. But as gratifying as seeing the plans themselves, which have been uploaded onto the website, as gratifying as seeing the highlights on the wall, maybe equally gratifying is seeing people from various national delegations standing next to the posters and taking photos of themselves with these commitments behind them. And I think, again, if OGP continues to find a way to create national pride and that sense of investment in national commitments, we'll continue to have the kind of momentum that we all experience here today and that we've managed to build up over really only a year and a half of thinking about what this initiative should be. I mean, we've come a long way collectively in a very short period of time. Just, again, I'm not going to say an awful lot, but I just want to extend thanks at the end of the day, as Secretary Clinton did and others, heads of state, did at the beginning, to President Dilma Rousseff, who has shown such leadership domestically, which is an inspiration to all domestic ministers and heads of state who are thinking through their national plans, to Minister Hajj, who's been her point person on so much of this effort, and of course to the woman that will henceforth be known as Minister Roberta, for really assembling, and I said this when we gathered in a preliminary way just before the turn of the new year as well, to pull together a major multilateral initiative like this. I mean, we had the advantage, the United States had the advantage of doing it on the margins of the UN General Assembly. There were already buildings and facilities and traditions that we were able to tap. You had the buildings, but the traditions you're making up anew, including, as I said, the posters, which I think are a great graphic representation of the work that's been done by so many individuals in so many countries in recent months. So thank you. One last sort of marvelment and then a little bit of substance. I just mentioned to Minister Hajj that at the Organization of American States Summit, which occurred last weekend, there was a plenary session where President Dilma and President Obama were on a panel together along with most of the leaders from the Americas. And even though it wasn't in President Rousseff's talking points and wasn't in President Obama's talking points at that time, they had talked about OGP separately, President Rousseff went into a long public soliloquy about OGP and the importance of transparency, fighting corruption, but particularly about the specifics of this initiative. And you could see a lot of the heads of state who weren't yet engaged in the process kind of taking notes and passing them to their aides and saying, what's this OGP? So we still have some awareness raising that we have to do, but I know from not being able to get a seat in the Latin American or either the Central American or the South American rooms for the breakout sessions, that a huge amount of progress has been made in the region. And again, I think it's a tribute to the regional leadership provided by Brazil, by Mexico, and then by some of the new coming countries who've taken such strides in such a short time. So I'm just going to do two quick substantive things, what I hope are quick. First, I want to run through, this has happened a little bit today already, but some of the thematic highlights of the plans, very, very briefly, and then just talk about, from the discussions that we had this afternoon, what the outstanding challenges are that we really need to put our minds to tomorrow and beyond. So there's not good news, bad news exactly, but you know, where we got to up to this point in terms of the plans that have been contributed and where we need to go from here. So as was highlighted again in a couple of the remarks earlier today, there are a lot of different themes that have played themselves out in the plans, and they are so diverse. It really is worth taking all of the plans and spending a weekend and reading them in one sitting just to see the range of ideas that have come out of this process. But one sort of bucket of innovation occurs in the space of public accountability mechanisms. And just again, Secretary Clinton flagged some of this, but the Slovak Republic has said that it's going to create a new annual openness barometer. Peru creating a governance observatory, and a public scorecard in the Dominican Republic, all aimed at increasing government agencies' accountability through citizen feedback and ratings. So this question of accountability I'll come back to. Open data portals, a huge amount of discussion of data, which I'll also come back to. Chile, Estonia, Israel, Italy, Jordan, Peru, Romania, Spain, Tanzania, either creating a new or improving existing government portals to make data readily available to citizens on everything from crime statistics to political party financing to local budgets and to procurement. And of course, George and his colleagues in Brazil have really been great innovators there and great leaders. New legal and institutional mechanisms being committed to or created. The Dominican Republic, Israel, Peru, Uruguay, all creating new state agencies to oversee everything from public procurement and service delivery, monitoring, to access to information, implementation. So, I mean, these are really concrete commitments that are going to be measurable one way or the other. Canada and Croatia are amending their access to information laws and systems to increase government responsiveness. And Estonia, Jordan, and Peru, as we understand it, are all introducing new anti-corruption laws or national strategies on corruption explicitly. Again, this is all, there was an action-forcing event, a meeting in Brasilia, and these are the kinds of things that the plans have produced, as you can see again from the murals that the Brazilians have produced. Enhancing service delivery. This is something that's, you know, when you talk about where policy meets citizen welfare and citizen reality, it's in service delivery by and large. Tanzania creating the interactive local water point mapping system. Spain digitizing medical records, and new or improved portals on service delivery in Italy, Israel, Tanzania, and Uruguay. We heard a lot, partly because of Secretary Salazar's presentation today, on extractive industries, natural resources, transparency. This has really been a burgeoning realm. Certainly, President Obama, when he was able to announce that we were going to join the EITI, was hoping that in so doing we could then catalyze a conversation with other developed countries that had kept, all of us have kept our books closed from the taxpayer for too long. Now what we learn in the national action plans is that Ukraine and Colombia are both signing on to EITI. Bulgaria, Colombia, and Canada are all taking steps to make natural resource concessions and associated revenues more transparent at the national and at the local level. So again, these are going to be very measurable, and hopefully there'll be a little bit of a cascade in the natural resource realm where countries that haven't yet engaged the EITI process or begun to look at their mining or extractive or oil and gas industries, we can develop some best practices as we each learn and kind of grow together. On international aid, you heard Secretary Clinton mention our effort to make our foreign assistance more transparent. I know a lot of the countries that are the recipients of donor assistance would like to see more transparency from donor governments. Spain and Canada have committed to making their development agencies more transparent and aligned with donor reporting initiatives like IATI. Public integrity, introduction of new whistleblower protection laws in the Slovak Republic and in Montenegro. We in the United States are trying to get whistleblower protection across the finish line as well. Very challenging, but so central to the whole ethos here, which is that from within, when you have access to information that challenges conventional wisdom or where you are witness to wrongdoing, that you have the protection that you need to come forward with it, and too often those protections are lacking. Citizen budgets, Bulgaria, Croatia, and Tanzania all creating citizen budgets at the national and or local level to ensure public access to information. E-petitions, we've heard a little bit about that. Ukraine, Slovak Republic, Moldova, Montenegro. We saw Estonia's, I think, and Latvia's in one of our last meetings. And then challenges and prizes. This is something that we in the United States also have tried to use as a nudge. How do you catalyze, how do you incentivize, how do you get officials who don't self-identify as open government officials to put their heads to thinking creatively, to looking at other countries' national action plans, and to innovating in any of the realms that I've discussed and that have been discussed over the course of the day. Uruguay, Israel, Italy, Jordan, and Colombia are all introducing government-sponsored prizes and challenges to encourage the private sector and public agencies to make better use of government data. So these are just a few highlights, but I thought it worth just reflecting on just what many of you are putting your governments on the hook to do. And a lot of those commitments, of course, were generated out of dialogue with civil society, because those were ideas that were put before you. Now, in terms of where we go from here, I guess as I was reflecting, you know, on the themes of the day, there were just a few kind of touch phrases that came to mind. I'll just run through each of them quickly. First, dignity, which I'll come back to. Second, humility. Third, urgency. Fourth, of a different genre, technology. And fifth, accountability, which is the essence of it all. I think sometimes, as I think Maria Otero, the Undersecretary, said earlier, these discussions can become a little abstract, even with those of you who've done so much work and are interfacing with your communities, or indeed are representatives of your civil society organizations. It can become a little abstract, even the idea of corruption, or the idea of transparency, or the idea of citizen empowerment. But I think, especially when one thinks about corruption, what it really boils down to is, yes, corruption is a major impediment to economic development and social development, for sure. There are kind of macro ramifications to failing to render government practice transparent. There are gross inefficiencies to not securing citizen feedback. But above all, what we're really talking about is dignity, is the dignity of citizens, not to be stopped at a traffic light and stripped down and you know, have a bribe demanded of them, not to have to pay, you know, in order to get electricity turned on, you know, some kind of extra payment. We heard from the Georgian today about how government revenue has increased by, what, 10%, even though tax revenue has decreased because the cut is no longer being taken. I mean, when you're a taxpayer and your money is being pilfered in that way, that's an affront as well to dignity. And the dignity of civic participation and being involved in a process of decision-making, of course, is another dimension to that. Second theme, again, humility. I was struck in talking to a couple of my Kenyan colleagues just before their panel this afternoon at their marveling at Secretary Salazar's reflections on the corruption within the Department of the Interior and what we call MMS, the Mineral Service Agency that is now obsolete because corruption was identified. And what they were saying was that they're not used to Western nations coming forward and describing corruption in our own houses, that we're more prone to wagging the finger at other countries than looking at ourselves. And I'm sure that's a fair criticism. But I think what you heard in Secretary Salazar's presentation was genuine humility. I mean, he inherited an agency where the natural resource companies and the government had gotten too cozy, and regulation was not tailored to maximize public safety and to maximize efficiencies. And that's something that he's and his team, who you were introduced to several times, have really you know, sought valiantly to redress. But there's something to this, right? He came to this meeting saying, you who are further along in the ITI or further along in bringing transparency to the natural resources realm, help. We're new at this. I inherited this problem. Other countries, I'm sure, have great ideas that can be brought to bear. So no one country has a monopoly on wisdom, needless to say, and none have a monopoly on mistakes. We certainly have made our share. But this humility, I think, is one of the defining ethics of OGP, is that everybody's looking around and taking notes on everybody else's presentations and everybody else's plans. And I'm sure if we did have a session, which we don't have in this two-day period, on mistakes made, we'd all be taking notes on each other's mistakes also. The third theme, just to underscore, is the urgency of all of this. Again, it can get a little abstract. But you know, the truth is, in many of our countries, polling data is very, very clear that citizens don't trust their governments. They just don't. They don't trust them to perform. They don't trust them to deliver services. They don't trust them to be free of corruption. And I would venture a guess that in countries where the polling data shows overwhelming public trust for government, it may well be that the citizens don't trust the polls. And so part of what this is an effort to do is to get at the sources of the mistrust, which are sometimes there actually are good reasons to trust governing authorities. But if you don't have access to information, or if you're not privy to the decision-making process, you can't really know. Technology. This has come up at every meeting that we've had on OGP from the beginning, and there is a pull, toward technology because it's available to us. It's increasingly inexpensive. It can have huge and incredibly positive ramifications for open government and open society. But as Secretary Clinton said today, technology is not a magic wand. It is neither necessary nor is it sufficient to make open government. And again, you hear in panel after panel, technology is not an end in itself. In some of the plans, and I know that we did this as well in our plan, there is an e-government emphasis, I think, or a digitization emphasis. But what a number of the ministers who are pushing data disclosure and so forth were quick to point out, and we just got to follow through on, is that digitization and e-government and so forth are just a gateway to the kind of accountability that we're talking about. They're not ends in and of themselves. But there is a way sometimes, because technology connotes modernity and 21st century governance, that you could stop the conversation once you get the records online. But when you get the records online, that really is only the start then of a dialogue that can be productively had. So this open government partnership is not an e-government partnership as such. E-government can be a critical piece of that. But what we're seeking is changes in norms, changes in policies, changes in public will and demand, and changes, of course, in political will. Accountability, and this is my last point, and this is where you really hear people struggling with, now that some of the plans are done and they've been posted online, what's next? And in some instances you hear, wow, the plans are great, they're so specific, we rushed to develop them, we had all these consultations, we got all the ministers engaged who hadn't been engaged or hadn't self-identified as open government people, and now we hit the finish line. This meeting was an action-forcing event. Apart from needing a drink at the reception, like what else? What comes next? What does our plan just sit up there online and other countries will visit it and civil society may or may not in our own countries? How do we turn great plans into great implementation? Then there's a lot of understanding on the part of civil society and the part of our government peers around incomplete plans. I mean, I think every delegation used the phrase work in progress at some point as they discussed their plans in this afternoon session. And certainly that's what, even though we had a very detailed plan in the United States with 26 commitments, we still say this is a living plan, this is a living document, this is very much a work in progress. Then the question looming as well in terms of accountability, what is civil society's role then going forward? It's one thing to develop the plan. What is the civil society accountability mechanism in a particular country? Some countries came out with those mechanisms, as I mentioned, in their plans, but for a lot of countries, those either loose and informal or formal mechanisms are yet to be defined, and that creates a certain concern in some quarters and certainly ambiguity and uncertainty in others. Then one of the things that people said about the plan, some of the plans were almost too good or too ambitious. At least that's what some of our colleagues said in the afternoon session. And partly because if you want to do everything, nobody's terribly confident you're going to do all that much of anything. And so the question in this next stage as to how to prioritize implementation, I think, looms large for a number of countries as well. And sometimes ambitious is another word for vague. And so all of us have to look at our plans and say, how will we even know whether we are compliant or whether we have implemented? And have we set up a standard where we can be measured by our citizens and by civil society? And I guess overall, and George and I were talking about this, walking in here, the real question is, we have had our events. We had our event in September. We have our event here in Brasilia, and the national plans have now come in from the larger family of nations that are going to be part of this, which is just thrilling. If you think about being on your computer and hitting refresh, what is the refresh on the plans? That is a question I think all of us are asking, and just for those of you who are new to OGP, there is no man or woman behind a curtain who's got all the answers. This is a very interactive community, and we need to figure out together what the next action forcing event is, what the accountability mechanisms are, and how to make sure that the civil society government dialogue and the refresh on the plans continues. So those are I think the themes that came out, certainly that I heard today. In terms of the immediate what next, I would note that we tomorrow are going to have a spectacular morning with some real heroes of the movement and some newcomers to OGP from Tunisia and Libya in particular, which I'll just touch upon here in a sec. But tonight, imminently, not only can you get a drink, but you can apparently hear, in the United States we have this show called American Idol. It appears that OGP is not the only thing that we in Brazil do together, but there is a show called Brasilia2012, I've just learned, and the star from Brasilia2012 is going to be at the reception singing momentarily. So that should hopefully give you an infusion of local culture and custom and energy. And tomorrow, I would note, I've given an off-the-cuff sense of what's in the plans. I know some Brazilian hackers, they call themselves hackers or internet types, have been taking all the plans and crunching them and trying to come up with some visual representation of the plans, which we're hoping to see tomorrow morning as well. So it's going to be a very exciting day. I know that it's a little overwhelming, and certainly even thinking about implementing any of our plans, never mind stretching ourselves and coming up with new commitments, is very daunting. But the last thought I would leave you with is just to think that when we first came together, again, just a little more than a year ago, to say, is there something there? Could we do something on open government, on open society? We never would have imagined that a year plus, what is it, like 16 months hence, not only would there be OGP and it would have a brand and you'd see Portuguese and Spanish and Russian and Georgian, and all of that is amazing. But if you want the greatest testament to how quickly progress can happen in real lives, look at the Libyan and the Tunisian delegations who are here with us for this 2 days, taking copious notes, literally sucking in everything that you can tell them about how you have tried to promote transparency or fight corruption in your own societies. And needless to say, when we first met, we couldn't have imagined that we'd have Libya and Tunisia here with us as democratic actors and as OGP aspirants who are rapidly scaling the eligibility criteria to make their way into OGP. So if you're getting daunted, just look around at how much has changed over the last year, not just with OGP, but beyond, and enjoy the reception. Thank you.
Senhoras e senhores, este cerimonial cumpre o dever de agradecer em nome da organização